That's what I like to think this has. Open humanity. I was talking about useless. Is your I don't think so. I mean, it doesn't want to.
Matt.
She said texture. Like, it's a feel difference, and I don't remember what she said, so right. It's getting close. It almost
Am I live streamed right?
I'm not taking classes.
What?
Yes, no, you force. Not really. When do you start?
Hi, Joe.
August 20th.
Hi, Joe.
I'm trying to figure
Exactly, but now they were out of, and now you get to talk about it. That's so fun. We had people sure, like even just on the topic.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. And every day was like something new.
29.
So next time. Yeah. Yeah. Does it right. You never had to really think about it until now. Exactly. So it's great to see you coming.
I'm surprised. It's a small thing for him. They're like 16 people, and he's going to come in at 6 and speak for an hour. And I'll be like, that's just. I'll try to get.
I'm live streaming. Yeah. So do you want to tell me why, what you're here to ask what questions of JB? Sure.
Well, Diana is my political consultant, so I tend to defer to her, and yet I feel like it's my job to be at least as informed as I can be about the issues, so that when I ask Dinah for input, I know and I can really trust what she's telling me. So I'm really here to listen and see what he has to say.
Thank you.
And then Croatia for 2 weeks.
Do you guys want to talk about why you're here and what you expect to hear or want to hear or want to ask? Or do you want to pass?
Yeah, they're doing the like 5 minute.
You.
Right, I'd say something figured out.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Can I ask you why you're here tonight and what you're hoping to hear?
Sure. Do you want me to just tell you?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not fully on board, so I'm hoping to be convinced, and I'm hoping to hear a progressive vision for Illinois, and if I don't hear that, I'll have to reassess my priorities.
Thank you. Do you want to talk about why you're here tonight?
As I've heard this 5 times already.
Hello. Does anybody want to talk about why you're here and what you hope to hear or what you want to ask?
Sure. Sorry. I'm concerned about health care for people 50 years old to the Medicare age. A lot of organizations are downsizing, so a lot of people are having to retire early and they don't get retiree medical. So I'm really concerned about that group of people and people who are contractors having access to health care in that age.
And retirement benefit.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm here to listen to JB's views on gun violence. It really, really disturbs me when kids get shot. Well, anyone gets shot, but especially children. So I want to
It's
hear
my
about it.
pet thing too.
Oh, is it really? Oh, yeah. If we did an AIDS quilt like thing for gun victims, that would be.
Okay, we're waiting for JB. Are you recording? Who are you recording for?
I'm reporting for North by Northwestern for the student magazine.
For what, Northwest?
North by Northwestern.
Oh, cool, yeah. Okay, we're waiting for JB.
I saw Chris's and I was like,
Hi, we're live streaming. Is that
Live streaming.
Say hello to everyone.
Hello. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see
Call me
you.
again if you can.
All right, everybody. Is everybody settled down? If you're looking for seats, there's a couple more here. Thank you all for coming out on what turned into a beautiful afternoon. My name is Elisa Kaplan, and I'm the founder and co-leader, along with my co-admin, Dinah Yantarans, of the Evanston chapter of Action for a Better Tomorrow, and I'm the state coordinator of the statewide organization. We've got multiple chapters across Illinois. We're a grassroots education and advocacy group that formed after the 2016 election, and we fight for progressive values at every level of government. I'm going to be really brief today because I know JB is short of time, and I want us to have time for a substantive discussion, and I also know that for most of you, JB needs no introduction. He's a businessman and a philanthropist who's known for his achievements in growing Chicago's high-tech industry, his work in early childhood education, and his contributions to Northwestern's law school, the Wrongful Convictions Clinic, the Skokie Holocaust Museum, and other important causes. He's also long been involved in politics, helping to run high-level Democratic campaigns and serving on the Illinois Human Rights Council. I want to especially thank JB for coming here today because he's kind of walking into the lion's den. I'm just going to address the elephant in the room here. It's no secret that in this neighborhood, many voters supported your competitor, Daniel Biss, in the primary. And it's also no secret that in this neighborhood, many voters have concerns not just about which party will control the governor's seat in November, but about what kind of party that will be. We weren't coy about our goals for this meeting. We asked you here with an explicit request to discuss topics that are uncomfortable for many Illinois Democrats. We asked you here to talk about fundamental issues that affect our state's democracy and our state's Democratic Party. That includes what many people see as troubling trends for the role of money in politics. That includes the intense and decades-long concentration of power in the hands of a few Democratic Party operatives. And that includes the way that these things contribute to the alienation and exclusion of many Illinois residents from the democratic process. So thank you so much for agreeing to come, for agreeing to talk about these really tough issues, and for reaching out to people that might otherwise come to you with some skepticism. This process of hashing out these issues, I think, is really crucial to our moving forward towards November and to moving our state forward for the next 4 years and beyond. We're so grateful for the opportunity to have this discussion, and I'm really, really honored and grateful to present to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't need that. I don't have my sheet music with me. Thank you all very much for spending your evening, frankly, for spending so much time and effort and energy as activists who care deeply about the democratic process. Some of you probably new to the processes of politics. Some of you have been doing it for many years now. I want to begin by saying, I'm running for governor because everything that we care about, and I really mean everything, is under siege right now. And it's under siege by a racist, misogynist, xenophobic, homophobic, I could go on, president in Washington, D.C., and also by his local silent partner, Governor Bruce Rauner. And when I say silent, I really mean silent. When Donald Trump attacks Illinoisans and tries to take away 1 million people's health care in this state, this Republican governor utterly silent. To be clear, there are Republican governors in other parts of the country who spoke up. Not this one. Lots of Democratic governors stood up to Donald Trump. This Republican governor stands with, well, very few, frankly, in terms of his defense or lack thereof for the people of his state. It isn't just about health care, but about so many other issues. When the assault on social justice out of Charlottesville occurred, when I think so many of us, at a minimum, spoke out on social media or in public about our disdain for the way that the president reacted to that, the way we expect our leaders to act, that president did not. This governor, what did he do? Utterly silent. And once again, demonstration of values. I grew up in a home where my parents taught me to fight for social and economic justice. Those were the values that they taught us. And to fight for equality and inclusion. Those are things that we knew as fundamental. Those are part of our faith. It's why I carry those things with me everywhere I go. It's why when I had the opportunity to, I helped to build a museum that teaches more than 60,000 kids in the state of Illinois from across the state to fight bigotry and hatred and intolerance. And 60,000 adults also go to that museum every single year to learn those same lessons. It's why I chose to run and got the opportunity to run to be chairman of the Human Rights Commission in the state of Illinois and turned it around. You know what the Human Rights Commission does? It stands up for people who can't afford an attorney and who are discriminated against in their employment or in trying to rent an apartment or in public accommodations on the basis of race or nationality or lots of other protected classes, including LGBTQ. And if you have nowhere else to go, this process of state government is where you go. Before I got there, just to give you an idea, the Chicago Tribune had editorialized that agency, this Human Rights Commission, should be closed down because they were doing such a poor job. I took it over under that condition, trying to improve it, and I worked together with Republicans and Democrats, because it's a bipartisan commission, to turn it around, and we did, and we actually made it much easier and swifter for people to get justice when they're discriminated against. When I got there, it took almost 45 months for some people to get justice. Can you imagine being fired from your job because you're Muslim American and not be getting justice around that for 45 months? People don't have time to wait or to waste to get justice. And so I worked hard with Republicans and Democrats to make sure that people could get justice. I also worked very hard to expand a program that actually President Obama originally got passed in Washington, D.C., to expand it here in the state of Illinois. That is a program that, with Greater Chicago Food Depository and Share Our Strength, allows 230,000 kids across the state of Illinois in low-income school districts to get school breakfast. These are kids who otherwise don't get breakfast in the morning. And this isn't, to be clear, these things I'm talking about are not just, J.B. Pritzker, a wealthy guy, writing a check to do something. This is me working to change policy. This is me working to expand rights. This is me working because I understand the difference that Bruce Rauner doesn't understand between business and government. That you don't run government like a business. And when I worked on Capitol Hill for several years for our senior senator and for others, I learned how the legislative process works in Washington, D.C. When I ran the state's Human Rights Commission, I learned how the executive branch operates, and very importantly, how you are responsible to people to stand up for their rights. Those are things you don't do in business. You know, the job in business is to make sure you keep the doors open and to make a profit. That's what a business does. The job in government is to wake up every single day trying to make people's lives better. That's the job of a governor. I don't think this governor understands that. This governor, ran around with his Carhartt jacket on in 2014, his dry-cleaned Carhartt jacket, and pretended to be somebody that he's not, pretended that he was going to do good things for working families across the state of Illinois. Then he got elected, and he pulled out from underneath that Carhartt jacket a hidden agenda. And the hidden agenda that he pulled out was one that said at the top of it, destroy labor unions, lower wages in the state, lower workplace safety. And you might ask, why would anybody believe those things? Why would anybody carry an agenda like that? Well, first, because he's not just he's a leader among the Koch brothers right-wing network. It's that same agenda that they brought to Indiana, to Wisconsin, Scott Walker in Wisconsin, Snyder in Michigan. You can look all around us, and virtually every state in the Midwest has now gone right to work, anti-union, and has worked to lower wages for people in their states. Once again, I think you want a governor who stands up for labor, who stands up for the rights of workers, somebody who has spent a lifetime, honestly, standing on the side of social justice and economic justice, two things that I don't think you can separate. Right. They really go together. You can't have social justice without economic justice. And so those are, the fundamental values my parents were teaching. Those are the things that I've tried to do during the course of my life. And so I was honored to run for and win the Democratic nomination in March for governor, in part because we cannot afford 4 more years of Bruce Rauner. We can't. We have to beat him. And I hear this from people all across the state. People are on the verge of something terrible as a result of what he's done. We cannot let him destroy labor unions and lower wages in this state. We have to make health care available to everybody in the state of Illinois and not let him diminish, as he has, the availability of health care or senior care. where, you know, he cut the community care program, home care for seniors, people who otherwise would end up in a nursing home can stay home if they have home care. But under Bruce Rauner, he cut the program drastically, people forced to go into nursing homes. How about cutting child care assistance by 90%? Now, I spent 20 years in the early childhood development arena, 20 years, fighting for universal preschool, fighting to help people understand that brain development in the very earliest years is critical if we want to improve the lives not only of those children, but of their families, to make sure they also get a good K-12 education and have the ability to go to college. And I believe strongly that we need to make college more affordable. But think about how the relationship between all these things. I believe that people's standard of living has dropped significantly over the last several decades. And that means that you need somebody who's going to stand up and work on the big things that are affecting how people live. How about raising wages in the state? Not just raising the minimum wage. Of course we need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. Of course we're going to do that. But that's not enough. Because even at $15, we used to call it a living wage. You can't really live. You can't raise a family on $15. So we need to create jobs in the state. And that's something Bruce Rauner never did when he was a businessman, because he fired people to make money. That was his business. And he really hasn't done it as governor. And I think you want somebody who knows how to create jobs and how to raise wages in a state. And I've done that. I founded 1871. I've helped people start a lot of small businesses. Two-thirds of all the jobs that get created in the state of Illinois get created by people who found and build up small businesses. It's actually the growth from small to medium size that really creates so many jobs in the state, and yet nobody's standing up for them, certainly not Bruce Rauner. We've got to not only create jobs and raise wages, but we've also got to make sure that we're making health care available and affordable for everybody. And that's why at the beginning of this campaign, I put forward a real plan that we don't have to wait 5 years to implement, that we can do really on day one or month one with a new governor, and that's a public option. This was not my idea. This was President Obama's idea. A public option. You may remember back in 2009, he proposed it. The idea was that people should be able to buy into the state's health care plan, which is much, much less costly than a private health insurance plan. And it's thousands of dollars, in fact, less costly. And we should be able to provide those folks who can't afford it subsidies. And we need to make sure that, you know, there are lots of folks who fall above the Medicaid eligibility, but don't have private health insurance. Those are the folks we need to cover today. So we can help middle-class families save thousands of dollars, and we can make health care much more affordable immediately while we work on a universal health care system in the state and in the nation, because that's ultimately what we really need to do. And then college affordability. Folks, people can't afford to go to college in the state of Illinois anymore. And in fact, not only that, but Bruce Rauner, with his massive cuts and uncertainty around MAP grants in the state, caused 72,000 students to leave the state. Now think about that. These are folks who would otherwise be our economic future. They're also our children that we want to keep in the state of Illinois. They're leaving. They're also leaving because faculty's programs are being shut down because we're not funding university and community college programs in the state. Look, all of this is tied together. All of this is tied together at the kitchen table for most people. It's the idea that your wages are stagnant, the cost of health care is going up, the cost of education is going up, your standard of living is dropping. We've got to change all three of those things to really affect people's lives in a positive way. Now, we also have drastically, I really mean drastically, affected people's lives in a negative way by virtue of our incredibly regressive tax system in the state. So we have a flat tax. Everybody, well, gee, that doesn't sound regressive, but you all know it is, of course, regressive. And it's regressive because when you add to it the fact that property taxes are incredibly regressive. In the poorest neighborhoods, people pay the highest rates of property taxes because we depend upon property taxes too much for schools. And in the wealthiest neighborhoods, they're paying the lowest rates of property tax because they can afford it, and because their homes are worth so much more. And so when you put that together with the sales taxes and other flat taxes, regressive taxes, you've got a system where people in the bottom 20% are paying something like 14% of their income in taxes, and people in the top 1% are paying like 4.9% of their income in taxes. That's out of balance, not right, and we need to fix it. And so that's why I put forward from the beginning of this campaign, I have fought for and been very public about and run commercials about a progressive income tax. Now, there are people who will tell you that that's not smart politics in a general election because it's hard to explain and people don't understand it and, you know, yada, yada. And I have to tell you, this is the right thing to do. We need a progressive income tax in the state so that we can alleviate the burden on local property taxes. We can fund our schools. That's the biggest thing. But it also allows us to shift what we have today, which is this incredibly regressive system. Let me just tell you one other fact about school funding that will shock some of you, but some of you already know this. Illinois is 49th out of 50 states in state funding for education, 49th. So 26% of funding for education in the state of Illinois comes from the state. And most of the rest of it comes from local property taxes. In contrast, in the average state in the United States, about half of the money comes from state government and half from local property taxes. If we just became average in the United States, I hope we could do better, but if we just became average in the United States, we could really change this system for the better, and we do that with a progressive income tax. We alleviate that burden on local property taxes, make the whole system more progressive. Now, there are a lot of other things. I've talked to you about a $15 minimum wage. I'm in favor also of legalizing recreational marijuana in this state, not principally because it will bring tax revenue into the state, though it does bring about $350 to $700 million of tax revenue by estimates that have been done in Springfield, but actually two other reasons that I think are even more important. One is a criminal justice issue. The vast majority of the people who get convicted of crimes related to marijuana are people of color. And we all know that it's not people of color who are only using, marijuana. So we know that there are kids who go to school in Lake Forest who never get caught or never get convicted. And that kids in other neighborhoods are more likely to have that happen to them. It's not right. It's not fair. We can change it. We ought to change it. I think it should be nationally changed, but we can do it here in the state of Illinois for sure. But there's another reason, that's safety. You know and I know that it's all readily available, even though it's illegal. Marijuana is readily available, but no one knows really where it comes from when they buy it illegally. Why not regulate it and make it safe? It's already readily available. You may as well make it safe for people so that we don't have problems when people are buying it illegally. We can just legalize it. It's been roughly decriminalized, to some degree. Let's legalize it. Let's tax it. It's the right thing to do. Gosh, there are a lot of other things that we should be talking about, and I want to open it up to conversation, all of you. And I know, Elisa, you may want to lead this.
So we collected questions from all of you when you RSVP'd, so we're going to ask a few of those, and then hopefully we'll have time to open it up, but we're pretty short of time.
Elisa, can I add one other thing I forgot to say? This is very important, I think, just as a table setting. There are a lot of people who think that Bruce Rauner is going to be easy to beat this year because he's only got a 30% approval rating in the state. But there was another guy with a 30% approval rating who ran for president in 2016, and he won. And he won in the same way that Bruce Rauner is going to attempt to win, and that is Donald Trump ran an intensely negative campaign against Democrats, and in particular against his opponent. Bruce Rauner has nothing positive to run. I don't think anybody in this room can come up with anything to point to. We've tried. And so he's only got one route, and that's trash the Democrats. It's to make stories up, not just about the gubernatorial opponent that he's got, but about Democrats up and down the valley. He's been doing that for years now. And he spent tens of millions of dollars of Koch brothers' money, by the way, to do it. We're not going to let them do it this year. We're going to compete with them mostly on the ground, knocking on doors, phone banking, and making sure that we get our voters out. It's what I did in the Democratic primary. I had 7,500 volunteers around the state. We knocked on, just in our campaign in the primary, 680,000 doors. That's out of 1.3 million voters that showed up in the Democratic primary. We knocked on 680,000 doors with our volunteers and made 2.4 million phone calls. Some of you probably got several of those calls. My apologies now. But we're going to do that again because that's how we get the voters out. We have to double up on it in order to win in the general election. So, sorry.
That's good.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that you're in favor of legalizing recreational marijuana. Are you also in favor of reversing the convictions of those who have been incarcerated for marijuana possession?
Yes.
Okay, that was an easy one. All right, now we'll get into some little tougher ones. Can I just ask the room, how many people here are concerned that Mike Madigan has too much power? We had a race here that in the 17th House District that Mike Madigan got very involved
I
in.
followed that.
Yeah, and there was a lot of, I think for a lot of people it was their first up-close experience with how Illinois politics works under Madigan. And so we have a question about, you've spoken about term limits for speaker. How else would you work to make the Illinois Democratic Party more democratic and less beholden to one person?
Yeah. So I don't know if any of you saw, I mean, I'll begin with this, that I announced the other day a project of our campaign called Blue Wave Illinois 2018. The endeavor here is to help Democrats win all across the state and up and down the ticket. There are a lot of folks who are running in very Republican counties, in very Republican districts, some running in intensely competitive districts. Once again, getting our voters out, making sure that we're phone banking, knocking on doors, and supporting those candidates is the right thing to do, and it's how we're going to lift up Democrats and particularly progressives across the state. You know that progressive income tax is a priority for me. And so I have been very clear with all of the candidates that that's something that I'm going to ask when they end up getting elected, that they vote for. And I hope they will. I'm not forcing them to. There's an old line that Will Rogers said about the Democratic Party. I don't belong to an organized party. I'm a Democrat. And I really believe, as I have, believed my whole life, that, we elect Democrats to go stand up for working families how they can in their districts. I mean, there are some fundamental principles about being a Democrat, about standing for the middle class and those striving to get to the middle class. But we don't tell Democrats what to do. That's my firm belief. But I have stood in favor of not just leadership term limits, because I don't think people should serve for decades in leadership positions, but also for ending gerrymandering, for having independent map drawing. Because I really think that all of us as voters should have choices when we go into the voting booth. And yet, when the gerrymandering takes place, you walk in, and in the general election, mostly in a Republican district, there's basically just a Republican running, or there's a Republican who stands a chance, and there's no Democrat running, or if there is, they don't stand a chance. And vice versa in Democratic districts. I think you should be able to go in and make choices. And I don't favor term limits for legislators in this state, even though I favor term limits for leadership. Why? Because I believe you should choose. If you like your legislator, if Daniel Biss had run for re-election, let's say for the state Senate, you should have the opportunity to vote for Daniel Biss again. As I live in a district where Sarah Feigenholtz is my state representative, very proud to have her as my state rep. She was the sponsor of HB 40, the pro-choice bill that has been so important that I fought for during the primary. I want her to stay. She knows her stuff. She's been there 20 years, but she really knows what she's doing, and I agree with her. I want choices, though. I want a competitive election to choose. I'm going to choose her. But I want competitive elections. That's why we need those. So those are some things. I also favor making sure that we change the campaign finance system in this state. Always have. And believe very strongly that two things. One, that this weird cap that we've got, where if someone self-funds by $250,000 and $1, that now all the caps are off, and I was not the one who broke that in my race, surprise to everybody. But I'm just telling you, we should have a higher cap for that, and we should have, in many races, I believe we should have public financing. I think that being able to go out and get lots of people to support you with $5 or $10 or $50 contributions is an indicator that you're somebody who is, should be eligible for public financing, and we should match those campaign contributions that come from small donors. So those are examples of things that there are a lot of different pieces of campaign finance reform that I think we need in order to make elections more competitive. But note, what we shouldn't have is a system that we've had, unfortunately, for the last, 8 years since Citizens United. We've got to make sure that at the federal level we're overturning and working on getting Supreme Court justices so we can overturn Citizens United. We need to find new and innovative ways to try to limit the influence of PACs and corporations in the political process. In Blue Wave, Illinois 2018, this project that we created, we banned PAC and corporate contributions to that because I think only individuals should give. So those are some of the things that I believe in. We need to put a comprehensive package together for campaign finance reform, but it's getting rid of gerrymandering, it's making sure we have legislative leader term limits, and having campaign finance reform. I think that'll make it a much more democratic process.
So a little background for the room for those of you who don't know. Action for a Better Tomorrow and Indivisible Illinois and a number of other groups have asked JB to sign a pledge saying that he would fight for a small donor matching bill, a form of public financing to help increase diversity and give more access to people of color and women and other people who don't have access to the same traditional donor and political networks. Will you commit to signing that pledge?
I will commit to small donor matching. I haven't seen the particulars of your pledge. I don't like the bill that I saw that's in Springfield today now.
What don't you like about it?
Well, here's the challenge that I think exists. In the larger races, in the bigger races for comptroller, let's take Susana Mendoza. When she ran, she had $2 million against somebody with $8 million. There is not enough money to fund all these big races with millions and millions of dollars. There just isn't at that larger level. We've got to work on trying to limit campaign contributions across the board. But I worry that since we're going to have trouble convincing the vast majority of people in the state of Illinois that we should spend millions and millions of dollars on one race, for example, that's going to be very hard to do at the statewide level. I think that for local races, for judicial races, even for state rep and state senate races, I think it's very practical to do. I just have trouble at the statewide level think about how much money is going to be spent in this attorney general's race. One last thing that I would point out to you, which is Bruce Rauner he started this in the state of Illinois. He wrote himself a $50 million check in December of 2016. I was not a candidate. He wrote himself a $50 million check, then he took a $20 million check from one person, and he's taken tens of millions of dollars over the last 3 years from the Koch brothers right-wing network to try to compete with that in a statewide race with individual matching contributions. I think is very difficult.
But there are actually many other jurisdictions that do it. I mean, Connecticut does it with the same amount of money that we have with a quarter of the population. We're talking about money that's 0.5%, capped at 0.5% of our budget to really change our democracy at the state level. I mean, I think what we've seen with all of the state rep races that we saw here locally with your race is that state level public financing is really important.
I do believe in, as I said, in public financing for a bunch of races. Someone said you self-funded. Yeah, that's true. Let me point out that in order to be competitive in the general election and to build the statewide effort that I think is necessary to beat Bruce Rauner, I did do that. Right. And that is the law currently, and people are, unfortunately, it is not a good system, but it is the system that we have today. And by the way, the other thing that you should know is I didn't take any outside contributions. So there's nobody who gave me money that calls me in the middle of the night and tells me what to think or say or do. You know that what it is that I put forward in my own campaign, what comes out of my mouth, is what I believe.
But don't you think that providing public financing would help people who don't have your means compete against people who do have your means?
I do.
mean,
I
right
don't
now
think
they
even
really have no options. People without enough money or without enough name recognition have no options.
Yeah, I think it's a trade-off. I mean, I'll be honest. I think that the challenge is that with the way the laws work today, that with corporations and PACs and special interests writing very large checks to other candidates, or Bruce Rauner writing himself big checks like that, that it is very challenging at the statewide level for this to work. But again, not to debate. I would love to look at the pledge that you're suggesting.
I would love to talk to you about it more.
I'm
because
happy
there
to
are
do that,
other
but
states that do it successfully.
And that's one of the reasons I think it's the right thing to do in quite a number of races.
But just to clarify your position is that it's good for local races, but not for state races.
Well, in state races, but not statewide races. That's what I
not
think.
governor or
I think state
comptroller
reps,
general,
because those races have become these multi-million. I mean, it's so difficult to compete. I want to remind you of something that Senator Paul Simon said, and he was a real advocate for campaign finance reform. And what he said while he was fighting to limit PAC contributions, and that was the fight back then, you remember. Now that almost seems like child's play, right, compared to today, but these were $5,000 PAC contributions. And what he said was, and I really believe this is true, that while we need to fight for while we're fighting for campaign finance reform, we can't unilaterally disarm, because the Republicans, I mean, Sheldon Adelson just wrote a $30 million check to, the National Republican Congressional Committee. How are the 4 candidates that are here in the state of Illinois that have a very good shot of winning, from Lauren Underwood to Sean Casten to Betsy Londrigan to Brendan Kelly, in those races, in Roscom's seat and so on, how can they compete in a world where we're going to unilaterally
but
disarm?
we're not
So that's my
suggesting that
concern.
they have to disarm. We're just suggesting that self-funders can self-fund, but public finance people can opt into the system.
Yeah, I mean, again, I
Anyway,
think these are legitimate differences.
I don't want to monopolize the discussion.
And I want to be
Let's open it
clear
up to
that
the floor.
one more thing I'd just point out,
Sure.
which is it's an ongoing conversation for sure about what provisions we need to put into a campaign finance bill. And it's something that I've continued to have conversations, not just with Senator Biss, because he's not the only one in favor,
Right.
but he is somebody who's been a leader, and so we continue to have conversations about what should be in a bill. But it is important to me, and something that we should do when I become
I hope
governor.
those conversations will continue. Yes.
I agree.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I'd like to say my name is Callie. I consider myself to be a progressive Democrat. My question for you is your unwillingness to support this donor matching bill for statewide races, does that have anything to do with the fact that Senator Biss outraised you by small donor contributions, and it would have made him probably more financially competitive with your self-funding campaign?
Well, I appreciate the question, Kelly, and no is the answer to your question. First of all, I didn't take any contributions at all. So,
Right.
how many small contributions did I take? 0. How many large contributions did I take? 0. And so that it is true that he outraised me in that way, but only because I chose, or at least significantly because I chose not to raise any money in that way. So no, that's not the reason that I have the position that I have.
I actually worked on the last time your campaign, the last time you ran for public office in 1998.
Thank you for doing that. It felt like a kamikaze mission to you.
My question is about dealer licensing. Rauner vetoed it.
Gun dealer licensing, yeah.
And Harmon came up with a solution to that. He tacked it onto something when he ran it through the Senate very quickly. And I haven't had a chance to really read it, but I saw things like they want to regulate and the behavior and examine the behavior of gun dealers, to make sure everybody's got the background checks and they can spot straw purchasers and that kind of thing. But I didn't hear anything about the ability to shut down a dealer if you get somebody like Chuck's Gun Shop up Riverdale, which for a while was the #1 source of crime guns in the entire country. would you support legislation like that where you can just shut down a gun dealer if they're filthy and they're dealing in the underground trade? Because about 90% of the crime guns come from a mere handful of dealers.
Yeah. Yes. And you're right about Chuck's, and you're also, let's put, just to remind everybody, there are really only about 4 gun stores. One of them's in Illinois, and 3 in Indiana, right across the border, that are providing most of the guns that are on the streets that are being used. They're illegally being used in illegal activity, violent crime. And so, we've got to do more, not only to shut down the dirty ones, and that's the whole point, honestly, of a gun dealer licensing bill anyway, because you have to get licensed in the first place and meet certain requirements. And the Indiana store, we've got to work in a compact with the states around us who have less restrictive gun laws, believe it or not, than we do, to make sure that those guns aren't pouring over the border. Because I think I read that 60% of the violent crime committed with a gun in the city of Chicago is committed with a gun that came from Indiana, from one of those 3 stores.
I'm Pedro Guerra, Berlin Tech Entrepreneurship Center. I had a quick question regarding businesses. More and more businesses are leaving the state of Illinois. How would you help attract them, and as well as the small businesses and local businesses in the areas?
Thanks for asking. So you heard me say earlier that I think a lot of the new jobs that we can create in the state are small business, startup business jobs. Very importantly, we also need to attract big businesses, but I have spent most of my career engaged with small businesses. And I put forward a plan during the primary. I'm not sure how many people paid attention to it, but I hope they will in the general election, because I'm going to make it even louder and more clear, that the state needs to stand up for small businesses. We actually need, these days you can't borrow money from a bank if you're a small business or a startup business. And so the state needs to create a small business loan fund, which will help people start businesses and grow them. I told you that most jobs get created by small businesses that grow to medium-sized businesses, but you can't do it anymore by virtue of the regulation on banks and the way banks are treating small businesses. So a small business loan fund, a micro loan fund, because some businesses don't take a lot of money to start, and then add to that technical assistance and mentorship. Those are all things that we put together in pieces at 1871, the Small Business Technology Incubator in Chicago. Those are things that we could do for small businesses statewide. So those are important things for us to focus on. And it's something that I've made a feature of a primary campaign, even when not much discussion was being made about jobs in our Democratic primary.
Thank you.
My name is
Thank you.
Jerry. It's great to hear that you're concerned about us moving step by step towards universal health care. As I understand it, the plan that so far you've been talking about is a buy-in to Medicaid. Medicaid in this state pays providers very little. And right now you're estimating what premiums would cost based on what it costs the state to pay for Medicaid. So what realistically are you talking about in terms of being able to pay providers enough so they will accept Medicaid patients, because a lot of providers won't accept Medicaid patients, and keep it still affordable?
Thank you for raising it, and it's 100% accurate. I'm so glad you dived to the next level. So what's happened is many Medicaid providers, because the state has not raised reimbursement rates in more than a decade, many Medicaid who were Medicaid providers have gone out of the business of providing Medicaid care for people. So that's a huge problem in the state. So we've got to address the reimbursement issue. Now, remember, some services are more expensive today than they were 10 years ago. Some services are not. But we've got to look through all of those services and readjust and look at how Medicaid reimbursements are flowing from the state. But we can't survive on what's happening today in terms of Medicaid providers, because too many are just going out of the business. I mean, I've talked to quite a number of them. Some people are doing it, they're basically breaking even. They're doing it almost out of charity. Some are losing a little bit of money to do it. But the ones that are losing any significant dollars, they've had to give it up. And by the way, add to that, when the state doesn't pay its bills, as it didn't for 2 years, and there are people still holding tens of thousands of dollars of state paper and aren't getting paid. And this is not Susana Mendoza's fault. This is the fault of a governor unwilling to get a budget passed. But I just want to remind you, I mean, the comptroller, unfortunately, can only pay out what comes in. And she's doing it as best and as fast as she can. But back to the Medicaid providers, if we don't adjust reimbursement rates for particularly those services that have gone up in cost for Medicaid providers, then we won't even be able to deliver Medicaid anymore, let alone allow people to buy into the system.
We have time for one more.
So, as you think about increasing income tax and property tax across Illinois for particular individuals, particularly the high net worth individuals, that will also likely lead to departures of these high net worth individuals, which represents a loss of taxes on their part, as well as the commerce and economic opportunity. What kind of solutions do you see are necessary to keep them from leaving?
So changing the tax system in the state of Illinois, absolutely essential for a variety of reasons, some of which I've pointed out to you. I have not said that I would raise property taxes. In fact, what I've said is I want to lower property taxes. Bruce Rauner proposes freezing property taxes, but not telling you how he's going to pay for schools. You can't do that. I mean, it doesn't work. The math doesn't work. So you've got to look at a progressive income tax in order to pay for schools and to allow us to change the dependency on local property taxes, which will allow us in the poorest neighborhoods, in middle-class neighborhoods, to lower property taxes. That's what it'll allow us to do. Having the state step up to the plate on school funding, which is the right thing to do, and the only way, by the way, that the new funding formula that got passed in Springfield could work. Just to remind you, there was a funding formula change that got passed. Bruce Rauner vetoed it, and now he takes credit for it. And that funding formula only work, and it prioritizes the schools that need funding most, but it actually doesn't work unless you continue to add about $350 million a year to schools, because that's how you change the way schools are funded. That's what got passed. So you got to actually provide that money. What did Bruce Rauner say he's going to do? He said nothing about this. He said, freeze local property taxes. I'm not going to tell you where any revenue is going to come from. Oh, by the way, let me shift pension liability from the state to local governments, which then are going to have to raise local property taxes, but they can't because he froze property taxes.
But even for the progressive tax, that obviously is going to be very important for people of high net worth. How do you prevent them from leaving?
Yeah, so if that were the answer, I understand your question, but let me just say this. First of all, progressive income tax will allow us to lower the tax bill, the income tax bill, for the vast majority of the people in the state of Illinois. So yeah, you're right. We're talking about the very high net worth individuals out there that will pay a higher rate. Here's the thing, that first of all, those are also the people who can afford it most. That's number one. Number two, if it were true that people just got up and left a state because there was a progressive income tax system, why is Minnesota doing so well? Why is New York and California, and let's look at almost every state around Illinois in the Midwest, why are they doing better than we are in job creation, in paying their bills, in paying their pensions? Why are they doing so much better than we are? And we have a flat tax system. So it's not true that people get up and leave a state just because their tax rate changes at the very highest level. That's not true. And people who tell you, well, I'm thinking about moving to Florida. Well, Florida doesn't have any income tax. They were thinking about leaving for Florida anyway. Honestly,
this is what convinces them, for example, to move.
But the truth
you don't think that's
I don't, because here's the thing. It is what's happened to Illinois. You may have said, someone here said, people are leaving the state of Illinois. There's droves of people leaving. It's true. But let's look at who's actually leaving. It's actually middle-class families that cannot afford to pay their property tax bills in the state. That's number one. Number two, those 72,000 students, when they left the state and go to school in some other jurisdiction, some other state, 70% of them don't come back to the state of Illinois, and some of their families go with them to that state. So this is a problem across the board of this incredibly regressive tax system. I'm telling you, if you look at the taxes that are being paid across the states that I've mentioned, you might come to the conclusion you just did, that people are going to get up and leave. They haven't.
Sorry, your entourage.
The bad guy? Or,
You're
yeah,
the bad guy.
Can I just say, let me say one last, if I may, one last very important thing. We have to win in 2018. We just have to. And I'm fighting for progressive values. I am fighting for democratic values. I'm fighting to change the way this state operates in fundamental ways, to make it more democratic, to make sure that we're standing up for working class and middle class families across the state, and especially, and this is very important, people who say to you, well, gee, what's the difference between Bruce Rauner and J.B. Pritzker? They're both wealthy guys. That's about where the comparison ends. The similarity ends at that. The fact of the matter is that I've told you, and you can go look at it, I've spent a lifetime fighting for these values. Bruce Rauner, I don't know, he was basically firing people to make money. That was his business. That's what he did before he became governor. I have fought to expand women's rights, LGBTQ rights. I have fought for progressive values since I was a little kid, and I've tried to do it my whole adult life. And I want you to know that we're going to make big change in this state. We have to. We have to. We're headed in the wrong direction. By the way, we were headed in the wrong direction before Bruce Rauner got here. He just drove it off a cliff and made it harder. So now we've got real work ahead of us. We've got to do this together. So I hope I can count on you. I'll need you in November and beyond, because this has got to be a grassroots movement to change the state of Illinois. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Everybody, there's a donation jar in the back. We are very non-profit. If you would just drop some dollars in, it would be greatly appreciated. And thank you for coming. It's non-revenue, yeah. It's non-revenue.
We need to know.
Like in real life?
Sorry. It would just be easier to
We can talk. They tend not to show up if there's, like I can't charge every single charge everything. They make so much money, and I think it's so hard to find, like, if I go on the insurance, but I just don't look at that.
What? I mean, true, but...
Wait, we're doing an interview.
Yeah, just...
By we, I mean
Yeah, so first can you state your name and spell it?
Yeah, my name is Aman Badruddin. First name A-M-A-A-N. Last name B-A-D-R-U-D-D-I-N.
Okay. Do you go to Northwestern?
I do, yeah.
Okay, and what year are you?
So I just graduated, but I'm a senior.
Okay, and what school were you? Okay, so why do you
Well, first of all, so I saw it on Facebook, and I thought this would be an awesome opportunity to see, you hear a lot about what's going on with these gubernatorial races online, but it's very easy, especially as a college student, to kind of feel a little removed from the process. And I think, being able to actually literally sit up front row and ask questions to these guys is incredibly important for the transparency of these kind of campaigns.
And do you live in Illinois?
So I actually was born in Chicago, but then I grew up in Paris, France, and then I came back to Northwestern for college, and I'm going to be in Chicago in the next 2 years. So, yeah, I don't know how to exactly answer that. It definitely does. It definitely does matter.
Yeah. Coloring in there.
Yeah, exactly.